Nick Angstadt from Locked On NBA here, joined with the host of Locked On Blazers, the great pass first point guard, Mike Richman. Mike, what you got for me?
Oh, just waiting to see what's happening next with the old Blazers. I'm sure they're going to play 1,000 close games over the next 10 weeks because the last 4 months have been filled with them.
Absolutely. We're going to dive into five things about the Portland Trail Blazers. First off, the playoff rotation. We've seen some changes here and there. We've seen some guys injured and come back. What's the playoff rotation looking like for the Blazers, and which role players are going to make the biggest difference out of that?
Well, the thing about the Blazers is they've basically locked into a playoff rotation over the last month or so. Terry Stotts, who was playing 9 and 10 guys and trying to figure it out, has locked into an 8-man rotation of Dame, CJ, Norman Powell, Robert Covington, and Yusuf Nurkic in the starting lineup, and then 3 gentlemen off the bench, and only 3 gentlemen off the bench: Anthony Simons, Carmelo Anthony, and Enes Cantor. That means Derek Jones Jr., who started for the majority of the year, is on the outside and not even looking in. He's just watching the games from somewhere else. Like he's chilling in his warmups and not getting off the bench. This 8-man rotation has been pretty good. They've been much better over the last month, over the last 5 weeks. But it puts a lot of onus on Carmelo Anthony in year 18 at age 36, closing in on 37, to be really, really good offensively. Enes Cantor, Anthony Simons, Melo, all three of the guys who play off the bench, they're offense-only guys. You're not getting a lot of defense from that group, but Enes Cantor is one of the best offensive backup centers in the league, probably the best offensive backup center in the league. Dude is he's just a production bucket. He's got real limitations outside of that, but if you put him on the court, he's going to get a double-double. Anthony Simons is he's good at shooting. He's a really good shooter. He's got some, I don't even want to say limitations. He's bad at a bunch of other stuff. He's not much of a playmaker. He's not much. He can't
Like
really.
it is.
Yeah, he's an elite shooter. He's a really good athlete. It doesn't translate to much else, but when he's on, he can really shoot it. And so, like, the role players who are going to make a difference are those three guys, because I'm not sure anyone else plays. The Blazers are 14-5 when Melo scores 18 or more points. But you're asking a 36-year-old to have a really big night off the bench. That might be a big ask. It's on those guys to score, and if they don't score, they don't do much else. So that the role players that have an impact in one way, and it's go get a bucket.
The team overall, we've heard a lot about Dame time and Lillard, and obviously we know that backcourt. What's the biggest strength of this team?
I mean, the strength of this team is that they have one of the 10 best players in the NBA, and he brings it every night. Damian Lillard is phenomenal, and there was a time this season when the Blazers dropped 7 of 8 when Damian Lillard didn't look like himself. He was struggling. He was shooting below 35% from three. He just wasn't one of the best players in the NBA, and the Blazers rely on him to be that. Their strength is that Dame is an elite outside shooter who stretches the floor, brings defenses out to 35 feet, and because the defense is so stretched, it allows his teammates to be special in what they do. It gives CJ McCollum a lot of one-on-one space to go operate and dance and do what he does. CJ loves to pound the rock and shoot it, and with the attention that Damian Lillard gets, that's what's going to happen. That backcourt is the strength of this team, and then everything funnels from how well they're playing. Like every good team in the league, they're as good as their star is, and when Dame's really good, the Blazers can be really good.
And then on the weakness side of it, we've heard a lot about the Blazers defense and how they've been one of the worst defenses. Like the difference between their offense and defensive, game and ratings have been so vast. Is that the biggest weakness on this team?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been better since March 24th, when Robert Covington joined the team at the trade deadline. When Norman Powell, actually, Robert Covington's been here a little while. When Norman Powell came over from Toronto and Yusuf Nurkic got back after missing 10 weeks with a variety of injuries, a wrist and a calf injury, they've been a middle of the road defense. And when you are slightly below average, that seems really good. When you were historically terrible to begin the year, they were 29th in defense pretty much all year long. They've been mediocre for the last 6 weeks or so, and that matters to them. That their biggest weakness is they can't guard, and they can't guard in a variety of ways. They're bad in transition defense. They don't keep the ball in front of them really well. They're not super sharp in rotations. They can be okay. But they haven't shown a proficiency to be better than okay, and that's going to be the thing that's a big question mark for them. They start 3 gentlemen who are 6'3" and under in Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, and Norman Powell. No matter what you do, those guys are going to be the size they are every single night.
What about this team's Win profile. Let's look at some of the best wins and the worst losses. This team has won a bunch of clutch games, and then recently, not so many clutch games. What are the best wins of this season so far?
Well, here's the thing about the Blazers. They don't have a lot of best wins. One of their strange resume was that they just took care of business. They beat everyone they're supposed to beat, and for a long time that was what they did. Their best wins of the year, second game of the season, they beat the Los Angeles Lakers, and then 2 weeks ago, roughly, they beat the Los Angeles Lakers at home to give themselves the tiebreaker for now over Los Angeles. They also have two wins against Dallas that are pretty valuable, 2 wins against Philly that are pretty valuable, including one where they didn't have anyone. Dame didn't play in that game, and the Blazers, and neither did CJ, and they somehow won a basketball game in which Rodney Hood and CJ Ellaby were very, very good basketball players. If you don't know who CJ Ellaby is, neither do I. I think those are their best wins. They have they beat Golden State twice. Those belong in that conversation. And recently, a win over Memphis to bounce back. But one of sort of the signature things of this team is until this week, they did not have a win over one of the top 4 teams in the West. They were 0-9 against the top 4 teams in the West until they beat the Utah Jazz in the final week of the regular season.
And then the worst losses of the season. What was the lowest point of the season at any point?
I think the lowest point of the season was a home loss to the Memphis Grizzlies. They had a strange setup where, because of COVID delays and rescheduling, they played the Grizzlies twice in back-to-back home games, and they lost the first one in a 1-point loss, a really close game. And this was sort of while they're jockeying to be out of the play-in range and win the season series against Memphis and all those things. And then they came back on a Sunday afternoon, and they played a really flat 3 quarters, and it was a nightmare. They also have a loss to OKC you could throw in there. It's one of their worst losses of the season, with all due respect to the Oklahoma City Thunder. But for what it meant at the time, I think that loss to Memphis, which was their 5th consecutive loss at that point, was probably the low point of the season in terms of losses.
Going into the playoffs, and we're recording this before we know, what are the stakes for this team? If they lose in the first round, if they find themselves in the play-in tournament and lose in the play-in tournament, what does that mean for this team?
If they don't make a serious run in the playoffs, they're in for, at the absolute minimum, a new coaching staff. I think Terry Stotts is a pretty good coach, but he's also had 9 years with this group, and maybe more fairly, you could say 5 years with this group. And they have been consistently successful, but they haven't taken the next step. And I think there's an urgency to find someone who can take them the next step. Now, is a new coach a solution? Who knows? But I think the stakes here for this team are that if they don't go on a run, if they're not a team that's, in the Western Conference Finals, which is a tall task, that we're going to see a new coaching staff, and for the first time in Dame's career, someone else calling plays on the sidelines.
It may not be a good solution, but it is a solution.
It's the easiest person to fire. You can't fire the players.
Yeah, right. What's the most prevalent national narrative that you've heard a lot from some of the, the talk show, the talking heads around, that's wrong or that's misunderstood about this team?
I think because the Blazers have looked so similar for so long that most of the talking points are right. Their 2 best players are little guards. That's still true. We're here in year 8 of that being the case. That might be year 6. CJ didn't really play the first 2 years, but year 6 of their best 2 players being 6'3" guards. The national narrative suggests that maybe you can't win with that type of size, and it might be true. I mean, here we are experiencing that. I think the thing maybe that the national narrative gets wrong is that sort of the Blazers are deeply reliant on CJ's secondary scoring to have a chance. And what they're deeply reliant on is literally anyone's secondary scoring to have a chance. Dame is going to bring it. And it's like, it isn't specifically like Dame, CJ, or no one else. It's what can they do on offense? I think for the most part, due to continuity, the national narrative knows what's the deal in Portland.
Is there anything on Cantor? We always hear about, can't play Cantor. They always bring it up. Is he just going to get played off the floor? Is that something that we've seen this season?
It depends on the matchup. When they made the Western Conference Finals in 2019, he was able to play against Steven Adams in round 1 and Nikola Jokic in round 2, and sort of slower, more physical centers was an okay matchup for Enes Kanter. He straight up outplayed Steven Adams in that first round series, and The numbers maybe don't suggest that he played Jokic particularly well, because Jokic is really good and he had a really good series.
That's what he does.
He was competitive and held his own. So it really depends on the matchup. In the Western Conference Finals, they played against the Warriors that year with Cantor, and it didn't go great. They had to go in another direction. They ended up going small and playing Myers Leonard, et cetera, et cetera. But I think Cantor has real defensive limitations, like I mentioned earlier. Everybody has defensive limitations on this team. That's how they've been so
seeing a trend.
Yeah, it's how they've been so bad on defense all year. It's you stock a roster full of minus defenders, but he has some limitations. But if he plays the right type of center, like if it's Ivica Zubac, or if it's maybe just Zubac, then they've got. If it's specifically one person who plays for the Los Angeles Clippers, then I think it's an okay matchup. Other than that, you might have to go small, and we might dust off, mid-season signee Rondae Hollis-Jefferson and see some small ball lineups there.
The great Mike Richman. Go listen to Locked On Blazers.